Welcome back to Crit and Crit. I'm Axion,
I'm Scint.
and we are continuing our way through Castlevania Circle of the Moon and our discussion of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And I got my controls backwards.
Rip.
I can fix that right quick. This should be 1. This should be 3.
We're a professional and polished channel.
It's not the first time I've had control issues.
Bold of you to admit that in public.
So, we're getting close to done with this one, I think.
Isn't Frankenstein just a romantic story, though?
Probably not in the term most people nowadays would use that for, but yes.
Ruining my joke. Yes, as far as literary analysis goes, Frankenstein is a romantic fiction. Not in the now kith sense that we interpret a romance genre today, and romantic as a derivative thereof, but as it was a work that came out of the Romantic movement.
And I'm cursed.
I don't actually know any status effects in this game too, but then again, we know that. I don't know much about Castlevania.
Curse in this game means I can't attack. So I am completely defenseless until it wears off.
Rip. So, I believe we've talked a bit about Romanticism before when we talked about how science fiction is generally regarded by the literary community at large, and Frankenstein's role in terms of saying genre. What genre? I mean, it'd be like 5 of them.
Something like that. Took up a whole episode, really.
Yeah. So, Romanticism, however, is a big enough thing within the scope of Frankenstein that it kind of deserved its own spotlight. This might be a fairly short episode as a result, but it bore discussion. So, the Romantic period, well, the Romantic movement was itself a response to the Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution, which, you know, was basically the birth of humanism as we'd understand it, focusing on rationality and puppy noises, apparently. Nothing like having a dog like make a random noise behind you and scare the crap out of you.
As you do.
But yeah, the Enlightenment is also like where we kind of got like the scientific process as we understand it today more widespread, a greater understanding of how the world around us worked, and it was kind of a push away from like religious leaders having complete and utter say-so over most of society, because scientific thinking was starting to gain a lot more common popularity. So this is not to say that the church lost all power. It continued and continues to some extent today to remain a very potent political player in the grand scheme of history and things. But it was kind of the start of not having quite as much. But the thing about having a world based solely in science and logic is no one goes to Vulcan for entertainment for a reason. Other than the fact it's not real, you know, but you know what I mean. Logic and science are really, really, really good things to base important decisions on. It's not necessarily the best principles by which to live your entire life, because people do in fact possess feelings, and ignoring and suppressing feelings often tends to lead to greater problems. Because it's a common phenomenon that we face even today of, my brain understands the situation is this, but I need to be upset for a bit. I need to process my feelings with this. And pretending you don't have the feelings of frustration, anxiety, sadness, etc. doesn't make them go away. It makes them fester. So that's a large part of the Romantic movement, is the acknowledgement of the importance of feeling. Individual feelings matter. Intense feelings are very important. Poetry can basically be as important as the sciences because it lets you express these thoughts in a way that needs to let them get out. While the scientific revolution also kind of piggybacked on the first industrial revolution, with people starting to move into cities with some degrees of factories becoming a thing. Romanticism focused more on the wilds, just untamed nature, or at least a more pastoral scene. Get out there in just the majesty of creation. Enjoy what is there. Take in the natural awe of the world. Let yourselves feel. With that in mind, you see how we can tie Frankenstein in. Because for all we talk about Victor dodging responsibility as the main thrust of the book, which it remains, there is a lot of emphasis on the environment. When he's trying to regain some sort of peace of mind after William and Justine's death, Victor just goes to climb a mountain and just marvels at how refreshed he is by the scenery and how amazing it is. Thoughts?
Not really much of anything at this point. This is definitely more a thing that you have put a lot more thought and work into than I have.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, did you notice, like, the
did not.
Great attention given to nature? Gotcha. But yeah,
I would not pick up on this if it were not pointed out to me, because I'm not that kind of reader. I would probably not have gotten along well with the Romantics, because I'm very much on the other end of that scale. I'm very much more of, like, I don't want to say more of the logical reader, because that's not completely accurate, and I do love myself some fiction, but I don't have a big love for the pastoral. I don't have much of an attraction for that kind of push against the Enlightenment type thing. I'm very, very pro-Enlightenment.
I mean, I think there's great merit to both, because, well...
Right, I'm just very heavy on the other side of that particular disagreement.
There should be balance in all things.
Yeah,
Don't tell Thanos. Yeah, Thanos is what happens when you go full logic.
And while I don't want to say that I'm in that position, I'm definitely closer to that than I am to something like Frankenstein. And
True, Thanos at least acknowledged that he did things that hurt people, which is more than we can say for Victor. Anyway, I found the passage I was looking for. Thank you for buying me time.
You're welcome.
It was nearly noon when I arrived at the top of the ascent. For some time I sat upon the rock that overlooks the sea of ice. A mist covered both that and the surrounding mountains. Presently a breeze dissipated the cloud and I descended upon the glacier. The surface is very uneven, rising like the waves of a troubled sea, descending low and interspersed by rifts that sink deep. The field of ice is almost a league in width, but I spent nearly 2 hours in crossing it. The opposite mountain is a bare perpendicular rock. From the side where I now stood, Montenvert was exactly opposite, at the distance of a league, and above it rose Mont Blanc in awful majesty. I remained in a recess of the rock, gazing on this wonderful and stupendous scene. The sea, or rather the vast ripper of ice, wound among its stupendent mountains, whose aerial summits hung over its recesses. Their icy and glittering peaks shone in the sunlight over the clouds. My heart, which was before sorrowful, now swelled with something like joy. I exclaimed, "Wandering spirits, if indeed ye wander and do not rest in your narrow beds, allow me this faint happiness, or take me as your companion away from the joys of life." And after he says this, Monster shows up to talk about child support. So, yeah. Victor is in a deep depression of the blackest darkness of the soul, but he sees a mountain and gets happy. Nature has a healing capability according to romantic philosophy. And I don't know if Shelley is if Mary Shelley is often considered a romantic outside if you don't know much about the romantic movement, but Percy Shelley is very well known as such, and she would have an ample opportunity to pick up on those influences and use those.
I was about to say crib off of her husband's influence.
Yeah, hey, it's better than the Fitzgerald situation where there's a very persistent theory that it's a vice versa where he cribbed off of her. We can get to that when we talk about Gatsby someday.
Oh boy, that's gonna be a lot like this, but a lot dumber.
What, you don't like the Roaring Kardashians?
Nope, but don't like that.
I mean, that's what I just asked. But yeah,
And I was answering.
the healing power of nature is a huge force in a lot of romantic literature. So there's a lot of attention given to the scenery, and there's also when he goes to act like he's going to make the second monster, you get this sense of isolation and desolation because of how black, how blasted and bleak, I cannot talk today, the landscape is. So emotion is carried very much through nature, and there you go. It's also probably notable that the environment turned hostile for him in that regard when he was about to do something scientific and wrong, that he then turned his back on and went to better climates. And yeah, let's be honest, whether as symbolism is like overanalyzing English 101.
I was about to say, isn't that 90% of what we do here, and the rest is puns?
Yes, but my point is, like, while you might not be familiar with the Romantic movement in intimate detail, the idea of the sun was smiling on this happiest of days is not exactly groundbreaking scholarly discovery.
Fair point.
Was more my point. But yeah, it's nature that plays a huge role in a lot of things. Nature, in some ways, was the creation's teacher. Like, that's how he learned about rain and fire, was just experiencing it there himself. Nature is basically his only companion, so he definitely appreciates the beauty thereof and how harsh it can be. Though one might point out that nature is at least unilaterally harsh and nowhere near as directly cruel as humanity was to the creature. Which is, again, probably a romantic mindset, is that, hell is other people.
Which is a sentiment I can get behind a little more than most of the things the Romantics had to say.
Yeah, it's maybe not directly stated, but consider if they're willing to reject, like, cities and civilization in favor of the wilds, well, civilization and cities are where you get a high concentration of people. So, by extension, going to heal in nature means healing away from people.
A lot of this is just because a lot of my dislike of this sort of thing is admittedly less about the Romantics and more about the kinds of people who, in the modern day, espouse a lot of the same ideas as the Romantics. And those people tend to take those ideas and connect them with other things that are less benign.
Thing is, a lot of those people, I'm going to reject this idea, are also the type who, like, while they talk about the importance of emotions and feelings, are also very often the type to straight up deny their feelings and repress them unhealthily, which leads to greater societal issues, and I'm going to leave that there.
I mean, you're not wrong.
So yeah, I can't really say that I would consider the current my feelings don't care about your facts crowd is not exactly a resurgence of romanticism, because they would have to acknowledge their feelings.
Sorry.
Okay, that's what the first step that you're getting.
there's a lot of overlap in the modern day between the kind of people who are saying, my facts don't care about your feelings, or whatever, and the kind of people who are like, cities are bad, we should all be rural farmers. It's basically, it's actually really, in that sense, it's really interesting in that the culture has gone through something of a swap in that regard, in that you have the people who are espousing like rural living and simplistic, a more simplistic culture, and getting away from urban life, but those are also the people who are like, I am a person of logic and facts, and I don't care about the influence of feelings. Whereas,
please don't make me get into the history of cottagecore.
I don't know what that is, so I wasn't going to.
It's basically the let's go romanticize rural farm life aesthetic. And it's basically a resurgence of a similar artistic aesthetic from the Romantic era, which is why you have all these pictures from that era of everybody dressed like milkmaids and stuff. It wasn't actually the fashion at the time. It was basically, let's go vintage shepherdess look today and get a painting of it because we like rural things.
Gotcha.
But so basically, humanity is cyclical.
Yeah, it's just it's interesting in reference to that to note that you were comparing where the Romantics had a big focus on interpersonality and associated with rural life and with honesty towards your feelings, and now that sort of thing is now more associated with urban life and the diversity of peoples that results when you put a bunch of people in the same location. And the people that are espousing the rural stuff that the Romantics promoted are now the ones saying feelings aren't important, and also being really picky about the kinds of people that they're okay with hanging around and being interpersonal with. And it's an interesting dichotomy in comparison to the historical trend.
Right. So other ways Romanticism shows up in Frankenstein, the idealization of women. So we don't have that many female characters in Frankenstein, which we have talked about. And the ones we do talk about would be, primarily Elizabeth and Justine. And they are both incorruptible, pure, purity, perfection, which falls right into that. They don't get to have personalities other than, I'm just so nice and good for everyone.
Go on.
I mean, there's not really much to say. That's kind of the problem, is, the thing is, when you idealize something, you tend to strip away anything notable about it, because what flaws can there be in a paragon? If you want something to be perfect, it's, by its nature, boring, because the flaws are typically what makes something interesting. Like, you don't have an interesting story without conflict. Just like you don't really have an interesting character if they don't have something of flaw. And Elizabeth and Justine don't. They're literally just there to be good people for everyone to look up to. And that's not exceptionally interesting to discuss from a reader's perspective or from a literary perspective, unless you're just talking about how they're a symbol more than a person. But again, symbols are not fun to hang out with.
Which kind of reaches the point of this which is kind of why we get sometimes into the position of, is this a character or is this a literary device? And unfortunately, there's, to at least some degree in Frankenstein, yes, Justine and Elizabeth and the various other characters that we've mentioned do have...
yes, and Mrs. Frankenstein.
Yeah, Mrs. Frankenstein. Do have a literary... Do have a... They're characters, clearly, they're people, but they, in the role of the narrative, they are more just a part of the set dressing than they are fully fledged characters in a lot of ways. Unfortunately.
But yeah, that's kind of a hallmark of the era. It's only when you kind of get like into subversions of that where they play with it that it starts to get really interesting, and I think that's why Wuthering Heights is so often remembered by people, because like it was not my favorite book by any stretch of the imagination, but for everything else about it, Catherine and Heathcliff are characters. They might also be symbols, but oh boy, do they have flaws that you can discuss.
I mean, there's no rule that says that that you only have to be one or the other. There's absolutely room for overlap.
Yeah, just Elizabeth and Justine and Madame Frankenstein are unfortunately not in that lucky category of both. They're just basically here to be good. And that's not compelling. There's no struggle there. At least not that we get to see, because Victor is so wrapped up in himself that he doesn't really discuss or notice any of that from anyone else.
And that's... I'm trying to remember how I put this before. Or maybe it was you, I forget which one of us said it. We both said similar things offline in the past, so I'm not 100% sure who said it when we discussed it on Crit and Crit. But I remember we had a conversation at one point which was basically... it was about Twilight. And it was basically, if the story followed any of these characters other than the ones it does, it would be a more interesting tale.
Yep.
And that's kind of a similar thing to what we run into with Frankenstein, is because we have these characters like Elizabeth, Justine, even to some degree like Carval, and others, and even to some degree, Walton, sorry. There's like nuggets of a story there that we're never going to get to see that could potentially be more interesting than Victor's sad moments. And while Frankenstein's story does have a lot to say that's of interest and of use, there's also the stories of these other characters that we never get to see. Except for these small moments where they interact with Victor and overlap with his story, and where his story ends up getting them killed.
Yep, but rather uniquely, Victor in this book is still the one doing the most interesting stuff. He's not really focused on it, mostly focusing on moping, but if we focus on any other character, other than perhaps the creature who gets his own story partway through, we would not know about the creation until he came out of nowhere and murdered the narrator.
Right.
Like, and that's kind of the thing. It's like, when it comes to Twilight, I mentioned that because literally the only thing going on with Edward and Bella is their relationship. But all the other characters are doing things. And that's where I have that complaint. when it comes to Frankenstein, no one is really doing anything about the situation. So Victor is still our most active with regard to the most interesting thing that could be happening, which is more commentary on him as a person than it is like the most interesting thing that could be happening. But yeah, I think that's kind of most of what we've meant to talk about with this. Like, there's also the whole isolation and melancholy thing, but we've mentioned the melancholy quite a bit. The romantics embraced it, and Victor mopes. Victor is a very, very melancholic romantic. But yeah, unless you have something else to add, I think this is a good place to call it.
Alright, we will see you next time.
Later!